Hubert Faustmann. Hubert, please. Okay. So Hubert Faustmann is the director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Cyprus office, and he will moderate the session on democratic resilience in North Africa. So please, the speakers will join.
Let's proceed. Good morning, everybody, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome from myself. You heard I'm a professor at this university. I'm also the head of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation office here in Cyprus. So I'm a double host. This is a double home for a German living in Cyprus for 30 years. I'm chairing a panel entitled Democratic Resilience in North Africa. Those of you who threw in an antidepressant in the morning were well advised if you followed the procedure so far, and unfortunately this panel probably will follow that trajectory. What we're going to talk about are 4 countries of North Africa: Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Egypt. And I Googled in the morning a bit the state of democracy in those 4, and I give you 4 characterizations that probably set the stage. So our distinguished speakers and experts will elaborate on this. So Morocco is in a condition of managed political pluralism with recent repressive intensification. This is the good case. There were Gen Z conflicts, protests, not conflicts, but protests in 2025. Tunisia, the hope story of the Arab Spring, is now in active democratic backsliding with the seizure of emergency powers by the president. Algeria, not a success story in the Arab Spring anyway, is in a period of authoritarian consolidation after a failed democratic opening. Not a good line to have. And then we come to the darkest story, that's Egypt, which is a deeply entrenched authoritarian system. So we talk about those 4 countries, and we talk about the state of democracy, if that's the right way of putting it, as well as the challenges and opportunities faced by those who still fight for democracy, civil society activists, human rights activists. This is very much the focus of this panel. So optimism within pessimism. So in the first round, maybe to talk about the structure, is that I have 4 distinguished experts. I'll explain and introduce them to you in a second. We will have 2 rounds of questions. The first one will focus on the state of democracy and the challenges faced. The second round then focuses basically on the EU approach to those 4 countries. To what extent, to follow up what you said, the European Union is sowing seeds of democracy. And we might be cautious there because the focus of the European Union has been on energy, investment, security, border control management. The word democracy does usually not occur. It's good governance is as good as it gets when we talk about political demands towards those regimes. So in the second round, we look at EU policy, including the new Pact for the Mediterranean, and what impact it will have on the democratization efforts, and then I will open up the floor to your questions and comments. Before I do that, please let me introduce our 4 distinguished speakers. I start to my right with Hela Ben Youssef. You just forgive me for mispronunciation of any Arab names. A Tunisian politician and activist serving as the vice president of the Social Democratic Party, Ettakatol, and vice president of the Socialist International Women for the North-South Mediterranean region. She has long been active in civil society, women's rights, diaspora engagement, and social justice advocacy. Then we have, to my left, Amina Zaknouf. Is that too bad? Good enough, does it? Okay, for not bad for German. Let's put it that. So I'm midfield.
You're German, so you can say Zaknouf.
Zaknouf, I can. Zaknouf, there we go. Learning curve. She's an expert for development policy and African youth, working on youth inclusion, public policy, and development initiatives across Africa and the Mediterranean region. Her work focuses on youth empowerment, governance, and sustainable development, with particular attention to African and Euro-Mediterranean cooperation. Then we have our online speaker to my back. Now I probably murder it. Amel Boubaker. Okay. Political sociologist and professor at Aix-Marseille University, affiliated with LAST, as well as a scholar with the Arab Reform Initiative. Her research focuses on the political economy of the Maghreb, Euro-Mediterranean relations, governance, and Islam in Europe. She previously held positions at institutions including the Middle East Institute, Brookings Doha Center, SWP Berlin, and the Carnegie Middle East Center, and has taught at several international universities. So last but not least, to my left, Rim Filali Meknasi, head of the Euro-Mediterranean Policies Department at the European Institute of the Mediterranean, specializing in Euro-Mediterranean cooperation, regional policy, dialogue, and multilateral initiatives linking Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Her work focuses on regional governance, diplomacy, and Mediterranean policy frameworks. So now we go into the first round, which is basically a question from my side to all panelists, and then 5 to 7 minutes answers. I think these are the instructions, then second round. And then we open up. So my question, we start with Hella, if that is fine with you, is how do you assess the current political trajectory across North Africa, both in countries deeply involved in the Arab Spring, such as Egypt and Tunisia, as well as in those that resisted the wave like Morocco and Algeria? I suspect you will focus more on your country rather than those four, and that applies probably to all four speakers. What role do youth and women's movements play in advancing democratic participation and political change? Hella, the floor is yours.
Thank you for all, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, it's okay. And thank you for FEPS to invite Ettakatol Party, Social Democrat Tunisian Party, and thank you for our presence, ladies and gentlemen, comrades. And I don't see many youth people in the university. I hope to see more youth today, because it's for this generation to stay here, to build together another future, and the resilience to start with youth people. And I apologize for my English, but I was read my intervention. And allow me first to say how meaningful it is to hold this discussion within a university setting. And university are place where ideas are challenged, knowledge is transmitted, and the future is imagined. They remain one of the most important bridge between generation, between experience and innovation, between today's reality and tomorrow possibility. I must admit that I'm a little surprised and perhaps somewhat disappointed not to see more students present today. Discussion such as this one on resilience, democracy, social justice, climate change, and the future of our society are precisely the conversation that concern younger generation the most. Yet whether they are physically present in this room or not, young people remain at the heart of the challenge we are discussing. They will inherit a world they did not create, but they will bear the responsibility of transforming it and shaping what comes next. Every generation leaves a legacy to the next. Our responsibility today is not only to analyze the crisis we face, but also to ensure that we recreate the condition for future generations to build more just, more resilient, and more sustainability society. The dialogue between generations is therefore essential. Experience provides perspective, while younger generations bring a new idea, new expectation, and often the courage to question established assumptions. Lasting transformation can only emerge when these strengths come together. And this is particularly true for the North Africa and the Mediterranean region, where democratic, social, economic, and environmental transformation were reshaping our society at an unprecedented pace. Today, we are discussing the resilience of North Africa, but before examining the region itself, it is important to ask a simple question. What do we really mean when we speak about resilience? It is a simple definition. Resilience is the capacity to withstand a shock, adapt, and reconvert. But in politics, however, resilience goes much further. It refers to the ability of a society to preserve its cohesion, stability, freedom, and experience despite economic, social, climatic, technological, or geopolitical crisis. And the crises are certainly not lacking. We are living through a period marked by armed conflict, geopolitical tension, climate change, technological disruption, transformation of labor market, migration challenge, and the rapid rise of artificial intelligence. North Africa stands at the heart of all this transformation. It is simultaneously African, Mediterranean, Arab, Amazigh, connected to Europe and linked to Sub-Saharan Africa. It is not the margin of the world. It is the crossroad of the world, and its resilience is directly connected to the resilience of both Europe and Africa, because the Mediterranean is not a border. It is a charted space of destiny, and it is from this perspective that I would like to address the two questions before us. The democratic trajectory of North Africa since 211. 15 years after the uprising of 211, we must look at North Africa with lucidity and honesty. Yes, we have witnessed progress. Yes, we have experienced setback. Yes, we have seen democratic blockage and in some cases a return to more authoritarian form of governance. But I would be a mistake to conclude that democratic aspirations have disappeared, because democracy cannot be measured solely through institutions. It must also be measured through the profound transformation taking place within society itself. And since 211, a silent revolution has occurred. A new political generation has emerged, Generation Z. This generation approached freedom, social justice, gender equality, transparency, and civic participation very differently from previous generations. Expectations have changed, social norms have changed, but the relationship between citizen and power has changed too. Young people no longer want to vote once every few years and then remain passive observers. They want to participate, they want accountability, they want transparency, they want to be involved in shaping the decisions that affect their future. This is why the democratic question can no longer be reduced to election alone. It required a profound reform of institution, administration, legislation, governance system, and the relationship between state and citizen. The Tunisian experience teaches an important lesson. Before 211, many international observers considered Tunisia to be a stable country. Macroeconomic indicators appeared satisfactory, and yet a revolution erupted. Why? Because stability cannot be reduced to the absence of conflict. True and sustainable stability is built open. Social justice, dignity, equal opportunity, citizens' trust, and democratic participation. Civil society has played a fundamental role in the revolution and in the evolution to the Tunisian governance. Since 211, associations, trade unions, women organizations, NGOs, journalists, and human rights defenders have often acted as guardians of democratic space. But no country can build democratic resilience if its civil society is weakened or if its political party lack the means necessary to fulfill their role. And we must also speak about economic, because no democracy can thrive sustainability when young people cannot find a job, when talent leaves the country, or when inequality continues to deepen. Democratic resilience is inseparable from social justice. That is why the key question today is not whether democratic aspirations still exist, they clearly do. The real question is whether our institution will evolve quickly enough to respond to society that have already changed. And this naturally brings us to the role of Europe and the second question.
Thank you very much, Hela, for putting your hopes on the Generation Z, but also lamenting the absence of the Generation Z in this room. Since I'm a professor, I have to take a line of defense. Our students, particularly those of our department, have exams right now.
Okay.
So they're writing exams right now, a 3-hour exam exactly now. So it's very, very unfortunate. We're very depressed when we invited the students, oh, but we write an exam. So they would have really liked to attend your presentation, but yeah. Next to a 3-day-long holiday, we also have the exams. It's, yeah, unfortunate, but fortunately you're here. So Amina, please continue.
Thank you all very much for all of your insights, for everything we've learned from you yesterday and today. This was a really fascinating conversation all throughout, so I'm grateful and happy to be here. I'm speaking from a perspective of civil society. I'm Moroccan. For 5 years, I ran an NGO that supported young Africans in better understanding policy, how it works, who builds it, for what reason, under what stigmas are they going to be living, who runs their cities and why. The stuff that makes life is what I've been interested in sharing with young Africans in that generation, Z particularly. It is the first time for me that I'm speaking on a personal ground rather than represented at an organization that I left a few months ago. So you get just me this time. And so I think my personal issue here was how we actually deploy an imaginary that Morocco is a very stable, politically pluralist country. And I do have to push back on that a bit, mostly because the question that you asked assumed that Morocco and Algeria resisted the Arab Spring. They didn't resist it, they absorbed it. Those are two different things. Morocco has a very specific playbook that it started implementing in the 1960s and that it perfected every time a social movement has occurred. And now that playbook works like magic. Every time a social movement erupts in Morocco, the same thing happens. A movement gets traction, gets identified, gets contained, gets offered a symbolic concession of some sort, and then is waited out. My parents could tell you the same story. I'm telling the same story from the 2011 protest where I was 14. My cousins will tell you the story in 2025. I'm pretty sure a lot of people will tell you the same thing in 2035. That is a full soundproof playground. In February 2011, a lot of us, or at least me, I was quite young and hopeful and story-eyed about the notion of democracy, accountability, and understanding what the left could do for a country like ours that believes in social justice, that wants freedom, security, and dignity for all. What happened is that in the few months of the protest, a constitutional commission happened. It created a new constitution with a referendum voted at 98.5%, which are never, very encouraging numbers when you come to think about pluralism. And the state continued to maintain control over the judiciary. The royal family actually controls the judiciary, the security forces, the strategic appointments. All of those were untouched. By January 2012, the entire movement was gone, either imprisoned or just vanished and disappeared. That's the reality of how Morocco came to be this very stable, safe haven for companies, Carrefour of the halfway between the Mediterranean and the Africa and all of that. It came at that price. It came at the price of the Gen Z in 2025 as well. 8 women died in a hospital in Agadir, again, in the country that prides itself with its fantastic architecture. Every time you'll speak to a Moroccan and you come to Morocco, he'll say, "Did you see? Our highways are great. We have great highways." Sure. Agadir has one of the most dire public hospital systems. A lot of people called it the death toll. And 8 women in the same week died through a cesarean section that was failed, which are entirely preventable deaths. This is what struck the Gen Z 2025 movement. At the same time, Morocco was building this image of, we will be hosting every sports event that will ever exist on Earth from now on until the end of time. So we will be doing the men's cup and then the women's cup. And then sometimes if pets want to do something, perhaps we have a stadium for them in Morocco. Every sports event is now existing in the country. We're still unable to serve, basic infrastructure to people. And so people went out. You know, they had the same demands as we did in 2011. They asked for the same things. They asked for public accountability. They asked for more infrastructure. They asked for human dignity. They're in prison now. A lot of feminist movements are the same. The same thing happened. They were repressed, contained, evaporated. And that is just the entire sense of stability Morocco loves to kind of showcase. I say this with the utmost love for my country, but there's no sense in not being critical in front of something that you just cannot bear to see anymore. And the truth of it is that I said it before, it didn't start in 2011. Morocco has a great history of dismantling the left. It started it right after decolonization process, and the left has been, not just as a political party and political movement, but as everything that creates an intermediary between civil society and voting groups and the government and the state. By that, I mean syndicates, I mean third places, I mean every bit of civil society architecture, organizations, NGOs, associations, anything that can build the muscle of civic engagement and that can build the muscle of democracy has been either deleted or co-opted or bureaucratized or too dangerous to inhabit. And so now, when you come to look at it, Morocco has 600,000 people currently in syndicates. We're a 40 million people country. So those numbers are absolutely tiny. And so how can you talk about, you know, class warfare, class struggle, or understanding the workers, or any of those things if we don't have intermediary third places to talk about them? What I think is the most mind-boggling and kind of confusing thing, which makes Morocco a donor darling and you know, a partnership darling for many people, but not necessarily the safe haven that we think it is the state appropriated the language of progressiveness. And so the state is using the language of social dignity and sometimes very administrative parties like the one running us right now. So the RNI, which is a very administrative, low legitimacy, low ideology, actually no ideology possible in that party that was created to govern. So it wasn't created with a backbone, it was created for the purpose of governing. That party is now using the discourse of social warfare, welfare, and safety nets and education for all at the same time as is it privatizing, lease backing, and selling public properties of Morocco. And it's that dissonance that makes it so that Moroccans sometimes feel stuck, incapable of commenting on a government in a country that seems to be doing well, but also incapable of being represented by this pluralist model that that people say they have. And so whenever somebody tells me, oh, you're in Morocco, you're fine, you have a pluralist world, I have to tell them, I'm a leftist in Morocco, I have nowhere to go. I have nowhere to speak to, I have nowhere, there's this one lady, and God bless her, her name is Nabila Mounib, but I mean, what can one lady do in front of all of that? And so, yeah, that is the current state of Morocco. I'm sorry, it's a lot more dire than what my usually people say. It's a great country, we have great beaches, please come. Most welcome. But yeah, this is the state of democracy in Morocco.
Well, thank you, Amina, for as impressive as depressing presentation of the state of Morocco and a system that absorbs change in staying the same by pretending to change. Our next speaker is Amel. My eyes go far. Floor is yours.
Yes, it is a kingdom. Yes, but he assigns the prime minister based on the elections. So the legislative elections happen, and then he assigns the prime minister as to be the leader of the party that won the elections. It's constitutional. Yeah.
Okay.
Always.
Amel. Amel, you're muted.
That we get talk about North Africa this morning, despite I have the colleagues that have better knowledge on individual situations in the countries, and I have my fellow Moroccan compatriot here, Amina, that spoke quite well on the image of democracy in Morocco. I wanted to go higher on a more regional vision on democratization in the region, since it's a bit more my expertise. and also how the EU deals with this before getting to a second round of, recommendations and ideas of where to take it. And I will take the recommendation that we heard this morning in the keynote speech of being honest first, and then seeing where, we can build from there.
We cannot ask the people of the South to continue believing in European value if international law becomes variable depending on the people concerned. Because the current crisis is also a crisis of credibility. When principles appear to be applied differently according to curriculum instance, it is not only international law that is weakened, it is trust itself. And resilience depend on trust. Europe must also move beyond an overly narrow vision of its relationship with North Africa. Too often, this relationship is approached mainly through the lens of security, of migration, and energy. There is legitimate concerns, but they cannot be the only concerns because the true wealth of the Mediterranean lies, it is a people. We speak extensively about investment, capital flow, infrastructure, and value chain, but no energy transition, digital transformation, or industrial strategy will be sustainable if it does not generate jobs, social mobility, and hope for younger generation. Economic attractiveness is not built solely through infrastructure and financing. It is also built through credible institutions, effective governance, and a renewed social contract. The question is therefore not simply, how do you finance the transition? The real question is, who will benefit from that transition? A green transition that fails to reduce inequality may ultimately generate more frustration than resilience. The Mediterranean must not become an energy frontier where Europe consumes while the South merely produces. It must become a shared space of prosperity, innovation, and co-development. Europe possesses capital, technology, expertise, and industrial capacity. North Africa possesses a young population, talent, significant renewable energy potential, and a unique strategic position. Our objective should be to build complementarity rather than dependency. The question is therefore not simply, how can North Africa become more resilient? The real question is, how can we build a shared Mediterranean resilience in which both shores progress together rather than managing their vulnerability separately? And I think to the conclusion, I speak with the real situation in Tunis, but I think it's after my colleagues. Yes, it's open, yes.
But you're done, right?
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. No further ado. We are running short of time. Amina.
Yes, I'll do my best too. I just wanted to say first that in the 10 years that I've been coming to conferences about development and Europe and what we can do, I think I've heard the word paradigm shift more than I heard my name, which can be worrying at times. I mean, if the paradigm keeps shifting every year, maybe it's because it's a cute buzzword that we use to feel that we're creating something new, and I don't feel like we are. So that was my little piece of intellectual clarity. That being said, I come from the world of development economics and finance, and so my job is to fund projects that have the potential to alleviate poverty and inequality. And one can argue that getting out of poverty, getting choices and agency in life is the first step towards participating in democratic processes. And so I think that's maybe where the blind spot of the EU is and could be reinforced and could work stronger towards that. I think we're seeing how development aid is being challenged all across Europe and all across the world. We've seen the death of USAID. We've seen how budgets for development aid have been drastically reduced in the 2 years. And I think what it shows is that that notion of international solidarity and cooperation that we as progressives, as I've heard so much today, need and want and believe in is getting hollowed out. And it's just becoming something that will look like pure self-interest and hyper-liberal and have a post-colonial mindset. Though you could argue development aid itself was post-colonial, it was, but it still held somewhat of a kind of all of its flaws, but it held like a normative claim that there were obligations between richer and poorer countries that exceeded transactional logic, and that we're watching the abandonment of that claim as we speak. And I think it is the Europe and European countries and the EU's responsibility, dare I say, foresighting responsibility, to uphold it, to defend it, to fight for it, and to show that this is what we are made of, as because I am also European. This is what we're made of as Europeans in terms of values. And so what that would look like for democracy in itself is, for example, let's say, I don't know if you've heard of Achille Mbembe. He's a Cameroonian scholar based in South Africa, very known for all his post-colonial writing. He wrote a few wonderful books about post-colonial work, and he is now running an organization that's called the Innovation Foundation for Democracy. It has offices all across Africa, North Africa, but it also has an office in France, and I'll tell you why, because France is not an African country, to the best of my knowledge. Failed. But yes, so it's and this foundation is supposed to, as he says, rearm the muscles of democracy for the youth. So what they do is a lot of conferences. They give scholarships to students who want to work on democratic processes. They work on policy advisory. They work on a whole bunch of stuff. The problem here is that it's fully funded by France, hence the office in France. And so I think this is exactly the tension that Europe will have to reckon with as we try and foresee a world where we want to support democracy and democratic investments and futures, is that it's really hard for donors to do something and not put their flag on it. And I think Europe would be really cool if it stopped putting flags on stuff and just did it instead. And that would be a lot easier for everybody to kind of work with it, run with it, and not be targets, systematic targets whenever they try to implement something out of civil society. And then I wanted to come back really quickly to my notion of agency, because there is a whole terrain of interventions that can exist, that already do exist, but they need further funding and further support from the EU to build democratic agency, and that nobody requires to call democracy at all. Randomized evaluation of cash transfers programs show that when you reduce material precarity, civic participation goes up. So the less people are poor, the more likely they want to participate in the civic world. Sounds crazy, but it's true. Participatory budgeting at the municipal level makes people care more about their municipalities, even in constrained environments. There's measurably increased trust between citizen and local institutions when they know where their taxes are going and how they're being functioned and works. Last mile service development and service delivery, rigorous tested and cost-effective interventions exist everywhere. And I think that's the gap we need to look into to counteract the democratic citicism that we all live in at the moment. Build real stuff, attributable, concrete, with a causal chain that enables people to see that it's not just about their voices, it's about their life and it's about their dignity on a human and personal level. And so I think that's what builds the muscles of democracy. And I think that's where the EU could have the most impact. And I'm not even considering the conversation around migration, because it's not my expertise, and there are people a lot more qualified to talk about this than I am. But there's a whole world where Europe is a partner for learning, for agency building, for growth, and I'm hoping to see that world happen now.
Thank you very much. I see Amel back on the screen. Do I hear Amel back on the screen? No, unfortunately not. So it's a bit like Moroccan democratization, no progress. This is, then let's just gain time and pass the floor to Rim.
Thank you. I'll continue on the same lines we heard on what role does the EU play or could play. And the short answer, long answer is continue doing what it has done best, supporting civil society movements that work on governance, democracy, and human rights in North Africa. As I was saying before, the EU has been a long-standing partners of those civil society movements, enabling them to have spaces that were shrinking or didn't even exist in those countries. And here I'm not talking about those government-validated civil societies, because we see so many in the last year's civil society conferences. If you go to Brussels, they are clapping at having organized the first civil society conference in Syria just after it stabilized. I'm talking about the real civil society movements that are fighting back the regimes in our countries, and the ones that keep democratic demands alive. And how? It will seem a bit, broad as an answer, but I think that we need to give Euro-Mediterranean cooperation back to the people. It is the spirit that led to Euro-Mediterranean cooperation, the Barcelona process, this will from civil societies to connect and to work together. And unfortunately, we've seen with the years that the process is more and more at the hands of governments. We heard a lot about the Pact for the Mediterranean this morning, and I'm sorry to be blunt about it. I mean, my institution has worked a lot on it. For now, it's still a partnership that is totally discussed and built between governments. The governance of the Pact is representatives from ministries of foreign affairs. Of course, civil society were consulted, but in a way that is not truly inclusive. It has been, ticking the box of consultations, inclusiveness, but for now, the Pact has the language of this co-ownership, but not the mechanisms to actually do it. And here, I think that the European Parliament, especially the S&D group, is doing a fantastic job of pushing the Commission to actually build those mechanisms to have people back at the center of the Pact. The S&D group has been working on a report that now is under negotiations with other groups, and I really hope that this report will, put some pressure on the Commission to respond to these demands of putting the mechanisms where their mouth is. And we don't really need to reinvent the wheel here. Those mechanisms exist. They function very well with other partnerships. In the Eastern Partnership, we have civil society sitting at the governance boards, advisory boards for the partnership. It's just a matter of adapting them to the region and replicating. To do impact assessments and monitoring of the implementation of the Pact, to know where the money is going. And this will not only benefit the interest of the EU long term, but it will also help restore its legitimacy and its image, the very notion of trust that Hela was talking about. The second level where we can work on is at project level. We see more and more big infrastructure projects being signed in North Africa because of this stability reason, global gateway projects. And unfortunately, when we don't have social dialogue around this project before they're signed at the design level, we see unintended consequences on populations. Problems of land access, problem of benefit sharing for the local populations, problems of resources. And so we need this social dialogue before launching projects to make sure that those projects are truly beneficial and fair for the local populations. And then third and last, on the more medium term, continue and come back, let's say, because it's not there in the Pact right now, to work directly on governance and democracy, to restore an enabling environment for those civil society organizations in the region, to do trainings for the independent media, to ensure freedom of association, to help reinforce judicial systems. There were beautiful programs on justice to, share experiences and successful practices in the different countries in North Africa, to do digital trainings as well, because we've been talking a lot about, this fight for democracy, but more and more it's happening online. Not only the Gen Zs are fighting online, but also the countries learned how to repress online. So it's very important as well to have digital trainings specifically on democratization. So all in all, counting again with the Mediterranean civil society as a strategic partner and not as a side actor in shaping the cooperation framework in the region, and being coherent with the values the EU wants for itself, but also for its partner. And this is exactly what we were hearing this morning. It's not a matter, of values, etc. It's a matter of common interest. It's the interest of all to build this kind of partnerships, and I think that's on my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I was not paying as much attention to your presentation as I should have, because we're frantically texting and trying logistically to get Amel online, and at the moment we try to get her on a phone, which so far is not working the way I understand it. So what we will do is to go into the Q&A, which we will finish sharp at 10:30, because we have a keynote at 10:35, so we'll have a 5-minute coffee break just to refresh yourself. And the moment Amel is audible, we stop the Q&A and allow her to do her presentation. In the meantime, until we are hopefully successful, any questions or comments from your side? I saw the first hand there.
Sorry, you'll just need the mic.
Thank you very much. My name is Michelle Patch, and I'm based at Oxford at the present moment at the International Development Studies Department. My question is probably to all the panelists. You gave a very informed and I should say passionate overview of the situation. And as someone who has been studying this for quite a number of decades, I'm very sad to hear that the situation is not improving, but actually getting worse. So my question to you is, what do you think is the role of European NGOs, European universities, European civil society organizations that themselves are currently being scrutinized, surveilled, even in long-standing democracies, because they're standing with their counterparts in regions such as the Mediterranean, Middle East, North Africa? What would you say to people who genuinely want to reach out and support you in any way they can? What would be your advice? Thank you.
Yeah, apparently we do have a sound, so I hope there's time for the answer. I have my doubts. If not, we have to do it during or after the coffee break. But I think Amel deserves the right to speak.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Well, thank you for your resilience, actually. And I'm very glad to be with you, even through a screen, a huge screen. So I'm sorry I'm not able to be in the room today in Nicosia, but so I will try to shorten my presentation. But I obviously wanted to begin with the word in the title of this session, which is resilience. I understand. I'm a political sociologist, okay, and I also work in policy circles, and I understand why we use it. It seems to capture the persistence of democratic aspiration after 2011. And of course, people indeed continue to ask for dignity, for justice, for protection, and so on. And they have obviously not disappeared from politics, as you mentioned it in your presentations. But resilience is not a neutral word, of course, and those more than describe actually the endurance of the people. For me, and that's my point, it also shapes the way institutions look at societies under pressure. And it allows us to admire endurance and praise endurance, but without asking too directly, actually, who benefits from that endurance. And it allows international actors in particular, and as it has been mentioned by my co-panelist, to celebrate civic survival while also adapting very quickly their policies to the closure of political space. So, in one hand, this word resilience, it allows regime to tolerate some social demands, provided that they do not appear as political conflicts. And that's what I'm seeing on the ground. In much of North Africa today, people have indeed not stopped making claims, but this is the acceptable forms of claim making that has changed. And on both sides, when you have demand for dignity today in North Africa, well, it has to appear as a development project. It has to appear as a training program. Your political anger, it has to pass through the language of youth training, women training, entrepreneurship, very much so, social cohesion, and so on. So this reorganization of political expression under constraints is what I would like to address today. Because it also challenges the usual story about 2011 that, in my opinion, has become too thin, because, you know, these usual sequence, we had uprisings, we had hope, and then backlash, and then fatigue of the people. I mean, that's useful as a chronology, but it does not tell us what happens actually after that people stopped to demonstrate, after people got arrested, after people understand what can still be said and what has become too costly to say. And if I am to take an example, or the example of Algeria, Algeria after the Hirak, you know, this mass movement who brought actually millions of Algerians in the streets each Friday, each Tuesday between 2019 and 2021. Post-Hirak, Algeria shows that very clearly. Of course, the Hirak, it did not create democratic aspiration from nowhere. It made it visible, but it was quite ordinary, actually, leaderless and so on. And people were talking about, indeed, dignity, but they were also talking about corruption and the humiliation that follows this corruption and the right to be treated as citizens. And so quite ordinary claims. But what came after was not simple resilience or science. It was people learning to be more cautious. They kept making claims, but they learned to move these claims elsewhere, into an administrative file, to create a startup, for example, professional strategies. So the political expectation is still there, but it had changed location. That's my main point. And that's really the point I want to stress, because when open mobilizations becomes too costly, well, you can see that democratic demand does not always disappear, or they are not only resilient in their previous forms, but they survive by changing their forms. So again, my main point is that politics has moved into places that do not call themselves political. And the same logics actually may help us to understand young people without repeating the tired language, or, you know, they are apathic now and so on. They are not, I mean, that's been very well said by my co-panelist. They are not rejecting political life, but they have stopped expecting official politics to answer them. That was obvious in Morocco. I mean, speaking about police pressures, about hospitals, about corruption, the wish to lead also. They are still speaking about power. And I think they should be, or the policies we promote should be answered in line with this other way to speak about powers. So a progressive Mediterranean strategy has to begin, in my opinion, from the cost of claim making, okay? When you design your project and your cooperation projects and so on, we have to ask what can still be said, through which words, in front of which institutions, with what risks, and who decides actually when a claim is respectable enough to be heard. So on Euro partnerships, civics and democratic support, this is the main caution, because indeed that has been said, Europe often speaks about democracy as if it were a spirit track, you know, rights, participation, and so on. And in cooperation, in practice, cooperation is built elsewhere. It is built in energy, in investment, in migration management, in security, green transition, and so on. So these sectors are material. People indeed do need water, they do need jobs, they do need schools, mobility, electricity, whatever. But I'm also asking what cooperation does politically, why presenting itself as technical. Because every program that Europe promotes creates a field of recognition. It decides actually which actors are going to be visible, which ministries matter, and so on. So technical programs do not simply deliver projects. They also create a filtering, they also create filters, they also select partners, they reward certain projects over others, and so on. So, and also more importantly, they make some actors very easy to found, easy to quote, easy to invite, and others become harder to defend, harder to keep close, and harder to name as partners. So the sharper question for me is which forms of civil society are currently supportable? And that question matters for democracy. Because eligibility criteria, safe vocabularies, reporting formats, risk management, and so on, they create a preference for actors who are not going to disturb the partnerships. So, in my opinion, this is where the evaluation has to change. It's useful to count outputs. It's useful to train people. It's useful to distribute grants. It's useful to sign partnerships. Okay, fine. But another set of questions has to enter earlier, actually, and even before the program is already designed. Okay, so the questions are: who will be able to speak around these programs? Who can object? Who can monitor the money? Who becomes respectable again through this partnership, and who disappears from the room? Okay, and also which claims to link it to my main point. Which claims have to be softened in order to survive? So that's why I would like to call maybe a democratic impact test. This is the expression. It's not a concept. It's not something very refined. But the expression is less important than the move. It's that we need to evaluate the political life a partnership leaves behind, because democracy and resilience in North Africa, that's not separated actually from water, from hospitals, from debt, from employment. So a program that touches those issues, also touches political life. So for a progressive Mediterranean strategy, and I will conclude here, I would ask a very direct question of every partnership. Again, what does the arrangement make easier to say, and what does it make harder to say? So if people cannot disagree, if they cannot organize, name conflicts in their own words, well, then Europe may have founded a useful project. It has not necessarily strengthened democracy. So that brings us to back to resilience. I think Europe should not praise societies for, how can I put it, absorbing arrangements that actually narrow political life. So the aim should not to be produced more resilient citizens. I think that the aim should be to make so much resilience unnecessary, because that means rights, protections, accountability services, and so on. That answer and room, give a room for conflict, because democracy has, in my opinion, never meant disappearance of conflict. It means that conflict can appear in public without fear. And I'm going to shorter here, and I will leave some room for the Q&A question.
Thank you so much, Amel. Unfortunately, and a bit in line with the democratic backsliding, the part with the Q&A falls victim to the strict punctuality we have to keep, because we need an audio check for our next keynote speaker, which is going to be Nicoletta Zingaretti, a member of the European Parliament, and we need to technically check. So please, Q&A in the 5 minutes, and hopefully later during the lunchtime. It's a pity we missed out, but due to the technical difficulties and a slight delay, this part of the section we will have to skip. But I think we need the 5-minute break, and we hopefully will be able technically to be all fine. Thank you all for your great contributions. No, we cannot answer. We have to be on time.
Okay, thank you. First of all, of course, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to give my contribution and to be able to illustrate at this conference of yours what the debate is and the choice that we are being made European Parliament. As the rapporteur of the Pact of Mediterranean at the European Parliament, I can say that we are starting an important parliamentarian process, a process that begins in a difficult time, marked by conflict, tension, fragmentation, and growing inequality. And for this exact reason, it can be and must become a significant political opportunity. 30 years after the Euro-Mediterranean Conference that launched the Barcelona process, Europe is once again questioning the meaning and the future of its relationship with the Mediterranean. At the end of 2025, in a profoundly changed context, a new Pact for Mediterranean was presented with the aim to reviving the visionary project born in 1919. To build a strategic partnership with the country of the southern shore in order to face together the major transformation of the contemporary world. The decision by the European Commission to relaunch a political, economic, diplomatic, and cultural initiative for the Mediterranean, including, this is very important, the creation of dedicated commissioner and directorate general, therefore represent an opportunity. It is a courageous choice, one that will require renewed and ambitious commitment from European Union. And it is important that this initiative comes today, precisely at the time when district in dialogue and cooperation seems to prevail. We live in one age where hate, fear, and indifference toward others dominate public life. Confrontation has replaced dialogue. Walls have replaced bridge. Yet it is the unfinished nature of the Barcelona process that teaches us that we cannot surrender. If many crises got worse over the past 30 years, it is also because dialogue has gradually weakened. Challenges of communication and mutual understanding have not been safeguarded, and political cooperation has not always accompanied economic cooperation. Over these 3 decades, everything has changed in Europe and across the Mediterranean area, and certainly not for the better. This is true. And the project was born in a moment of great historical confidence after the Cold War, with the ambition of making Euro-Mediterranean dialogue one of the pillars of European integration. But the fall of the Berlin Wall quickly moved the political attention and the strategic priority toward the East, enlargement and stabilization in Central and Eastern Europe, become the European Union's primary focus, leaving the South in the background. And we have to have the courage to say this. Perhaps during those years, both the opportunity and the risk represented by the Mediterranean space were underestimated, and many challenges remain unsolved. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean region entered a phase of growing instability. The collapse of several regimes in North Africa after the 2011 uprising conflict in sub-Saharan Africa, the fragmentation of the Middle East, and increasing religion identity tension profoundly transformed the context in which Europe was called to engage. At the same time, new global actors, especially the China and Russia, strengthened their presence in the region, particularly across Africa, progressively reducing Europe's presence. The overall balance is therefore very complex. The development and the integration envisioned in the 1995 have not fully materialized. A genuine shared area of prosperity and stability did not emerge. Instead, tension, fear, often dramatic migration flow, institutional fragility and energy insecurity have increased. In short, there has not been a true political investment in a Euro-Mediterranean dialogue over these years. And today, we clearly see the consequence. This is why, speaking today about Europe and the Mediterranean, returning to action and rebuilding relationship is not a theoretical exercise, but it is a political and strategical necessity. The Mediterranean is not simply Europe's neighbor. It is a shared political space in which the future of the European Union itself is at stake, from energy corridors to migration policy, from climate challenges to the construction of a new global alliance. If we consider only the country directly bordering the Mediterranean, we are speaking about more than 520 million people, shaped by extraordinary cultural, religion, social, and linguistic diversity. And this common space also belongs to the Northern Europe country, which must feel part of shared destiny. Potentially, this is an immense strength, but without cooperation, genuine partnership, it is also become a source of great instability and disorder. For this reason, as Rapporteur of Foreign Affairs Committee, I want to strongly emphasize what the role of civil society, of the people, and dialogue must be. We must not simply describe the present. This is the point. We must not simply describe the present. I repeat. Now we imagine resolving conflict that have deep and complex roots. But in this time of distrust and tension among governments in the region, we must have the courage to invest in the strength of civil society, in dialogue, in mutual understanding, and economic and cultural exchange. We must invest to the people, because we cannot wait for governments alone to rebuild a climate of peace and cooperation. And we cannot remain passive observers to the conflict. We must begin to create space for dialogue, to break down walls, and to build relationships. This is the deepest meaning of the new Pact of Mediterranean. Not surrendering to absence of dialogue, but bringing together the people who live in the Mediterranean every day. Culture, research, education, politics, university, civil society, organization, business, connecting different people, different religions, and different experience is an essential condition for creating a new climate of peace and cooperation. Investment and trade alone are not enough. Cooperation also means reopening channels of communication, expanding mobility and exchange, and no longer viewing the Mediterranean as a border, but as a bridge. And it also means ensuring that the European investment in the region are accompanied by strong guarantees regarding democracy, human rights, rule of law, and transparency. Today, Europe must demonstrate its willingness to build a true partnership among equals, not an asymmetric relationship between donor and beneficiary, but a shared responsibility based on genuine co-ownership, common objective, and shared vision for the future. These are all aspects we are trying to focus in my report. Repeating the mistake on the past 30 years will mean condemning the Mediterranean area and the broader Middle Eastern neighbor to further marginalization. But if Europe can rediscover a united vision and political courage, then the Mediterranean can once again become what it was historically was being, not a frontier to defend, but a bridge to cross, not a space of competition only, but a shared space of stability, prosperity, and peace. Because peace is not invented. Peace is built step by step. Together, and finish, we can contribute to build the impact of Mediterranean that is not merely a technical administration framework. This is the point, but a true political project of shared prosperity, stability, and dignity, but we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zingaret. Thank you very much. We just had a small technical issue at the end, but we could hear, the overall of your message very well. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. See you.
And now I'll just call the next table. So the moderators and the speakers to join here, please, at this stage. Thank you.